Likely a biased question based on company. However, are there any pieces of advice or best practices on gaining leadership buy-in for the move to cloud? Given that data center end of life, my leaders are pushing back that the migration back until absolutely necessary. So pieces of advice for doing it now versus later. First and foremost, you don't have like, this is the biggest shift, and depending, like, mind you, I've been on the back end. I love the access to the back end. But if you don't have to worry about losing space, running out of space, maintaining any of those updates that come through, whether it's to the database, whatever it is, if you move to cloud, that's going to be your primary thing. You free up this mental load, this mental area of when you're on an on-prem data center, you have checklists to go through. Their practices of gaining leadership, like your biggest thing is going to be licensing. And I can't tell you, depending on the size of, like, it's going to be that cost model. So there are things in cloud that are native to cloud that require plugins in data center. So I would identify if there are any plugins that can be offloaded, savings, cost savings of any sort. Talk about the man hours, the hours that it takes to either maintain and keep the data center up and running. If there, I would want to understand if I was you, what the pushback drives from. Is it concern with cloud? Is it cost? What are those things that are making them say, we're going to wait until it's like absolutely necessary? Are they concerned about the disruption? So I would push back and try, if you're able to, ask, why is there, that concern? But the two biggest things when it comes to leadership is freeing up time, freeing up money. Okay. How long before your license is up would you ideally recommend starting this process? This is going to be dependent on the size of your instance and how many apps you have that you need to find out if they're compatible or not. Let's take a medium-sized instance, so maybe 200 to 300 spaces with 15 apps. I would, at bare minimum, start like the heavy lifting of a migration at least 4 months before my license is going to expire. You're going to spend a lot of time specifically on your apps. And that's like the absolute. Ideally, you want to start thinking about it the year that your license is going to expire or come up for, quote unquote, the renew, you can't renew. I would, like, within a year, to start thinking about it and start that prep process 6 to 8 months prior. Again, this is going to be completely based on the reality of the size of your instance and the team size that you have. That I was able to move what I would consider a small instance and a fairly lean instance in about 3 weeks from start to go live. It is doable, but it is not recommended, especially if you've not done one before. Does Atlassian have a ready project plan to import into our DC so we can track progress of tasks to ensure everything Atlassian Cloud is considered and completed? Not that I know of. I do not think that they have a basic project that you can go in and end that checklist. That's why I'm here. That's why I kind of walking. You can work with us and we can get something pulled together for you. But ultimately, not that I know of. They have a checklist, but not a project plan that you can go through and make sure this has been done, this has been done. As far as I know, nothing formally from Atlassian has been is out for something like that. Can you overwrite Sandbox rather than creating another? Theoretically, yes. But if you do any cleanup from your test, it's not going to clear out the things you cleaned up. So if you identified certain work types that were coming over and you're like, hey, we can quickly move these, any of that cleanup, like you theoretically can do an overwrite, but it's not going to be a full overwrite. It'll still keep some of that stuff in it. And so there is that with the migration assistant. It's going to keep the bloat that you might be cleaning it up, that you've cleaned up after you tested and viewed it. So there's that to consider. How long does Atlassian take to wipe the sandbox? It depends on your license. They have different support models for the different tiers. So if you're on standard, I would expect probably a 1 to 3 days for that sandbox to be wiped, especially depending on when the request gets put in. If it gets put in first thing Monday morning, you may have a clean sandbox by Monday afternoon, but it really just depends on what your license model is and when that request comes in. You can move one project at a time to prod. So just for some clarification, when you're moving one project at a time to production, you mean from data center, you've done your tests, you're not moving it from sandbox because you can't, you just recreate it. You can always move one project at a time. You can migrate one at a time. Not ideal if you have hundreds of projects, but you can choose, hey, I only want to move this one project. You move that one over, you validate, and then you're like, I want to move this one. The problem with that is using the migration assistant, every migration that you do through that, like you have to run through all those checks again. So it's not ideal because it will just take a lot of time. If it's what makes you feel comfortable, go for it. Just know you're going to be creating a migration, basically line item for every project you migrate. That's just something to keep in mind. And each time you start a migration, you run the checks on everything. And so just expect it to add some additional time to get through that. All right. Does it determine any filters that may be in what is migrated versus just validating that it has all active ones to work for that specific project? I'm not sure I fully understand this question, but we're going to try to answer it. So what it is doing is instead of saying, hey, I want every possible filter that comes over, it's validating that the filters they are bringing over relate to active work that's also being brought over. So it's not going to bring over broken filters and boards. It's also, you're not going to get stuck in this infinite loop of errors. I'm not sure if that answered the question, but yeah, so that it will validate if you're bringing anything over that is related to active projects or active work, right? Because work has to live in a project, so it's got to be active or archived, right? It will include those. If the migration fails for some reason, what needs to be done? A migration, the fail of it, is it failing in the middle of it? Like, did anything actually get moved over? Usually the migration's going to fail before you've caused any movement of data, because the migration assistance is very, there's a lot of guardrails to make sure that like everything can be moved because it wants to avoid failing. So how do we make sure the respective space is migrated and not, let's say, a bunch of projects are planned to migrate? What point in time? I'm not sure I can answer the rest of it because I'm not quite sure what the question. How do we make sure the respective space is migrated? So if you're worried, let's go back to, you can remove one space at a time instead of all of the projects. So if you continue to get a failure, and the failures are not vague, like within the migration assistance, it gives you pretty clear information, which it tells you like why it will fail, or if it does fail, like why it failed. But if you wanted that, if you migrated 15 projects over and or you tried to and it failed, it should tell you where the problem was. If you're concerned about that, you can migrate one project at a time, and then you would really be able to pinpoint, like, okay, this is the error project. But you wouldn't really be able to get to that point because it wouldn't let you move forward. That migration assistant is really helpful. Let's see. This might just be some tip. Also worth noting, if you're migrating a small DC instance into an already established cloud instance, you should allow for post-migration tidy up. Yes, if you are moving a DC into an existing, used, already live cloud instance, definitely, because it'll duplicate fields, 100%. There's not much you can do about it. What it's going to do is it's going to add migrated at the end of the field. So that gives you a spot, but yes, thank you so much, Tina. Very important if you are, because it will duplicate. What are the challenges that I faced respect to plugins and data migration? So one of the biggest challenges is compatibility, and each one, if it's incompatible, each one has a different use case on working with the vendor. Now, if it's a free app, the likelihood your service is like your support is probably not going to be there. So you need to find an app that's going to do the same thing and determine what configuration was on that free plugin. Paid plugins, if there's not a compatible app, work directly with the vendor. They're going to understand how to get their data out of where it is and where you need it to be. So that's the biggest challenge, is any of the incompatibilities. Compatible ones, they've had a lot of time, literally a decade, to build their non-compatible cloud apps, like to have cloud applications. So that ends up not being a massive challenge anymore. Before, it was a prime reason why people did not move. Very much like if you remember back when iPhone and Android, it's less so now, but a lot of people stayed with one or the other because there were apps that were not compatible between the two. A little bit similar, but a lot less common now. Usually you're going to run into that with the free apps that somebody created because they had a problem to solved it, and there you go, because the support of getting it.